My wife thinks I'm too skeptical for my own good. She says it like it's a flaw. I've always thought of it as the opposite. I'm 32 years old, and I have never once believed in anything I couldn't see or touch or explain in plain language, and that has served me just fine. I'm telling you that because of what happened last September when she and the kids were at her mother's for the weekend. I was alone at the house. We live outside a small town in central Kansas. When I say outside, I mean outside. The nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile east, and the nearest anything else is a 12-minute drive. Flat land in every direction. Big sky, tree line along the back edge of the property, where the land dips slightly before opening back up into more nothing. I grew up in this kind of place. The quiet has never bothered me. I had a fire going in the backyard around 9. Just me and a beer and the kind of silence you can actually decompress in. No wind. Clear sky. The fire was the only sound for maybe an hour. Then I heard it. A rhythmic knocking sound coming from the tree line, spaced out and heavy. Once every few seconds, consistently. It took me a minute to place it, and then I did. It was an axe striking wood. Somebody was out there in the dark chopping something. My first thought was that Ellery kid from down the road. 17 and not always thinking straight. Maybe trespassing to cut wood for something. My second thought was that it was nearly 10 at night, which was a strange time for it. My third thought was that it wasn't really my problem either way, and I finished my beer. But it kept going. Same rhythm, same interval, for another 20 minutes while I sat there. Never speeding up, never slowing down. Patient and mechanical. I got my flashlight from the garage and walked out toward the tree line. The beam found him before I expected to. He was maybe 40 feet into the trees, standing at the base of the biggest oak on the property. A tree that had been there since before my house was built and probably before my father was born. The trunk on it was easily 4 feet across. The man was medium height, wearing work boots, a dark canvas jacket, and a full-size axe in both hands. He was mid-swing when my light hit him, and he finished the swing and stopped. Called out and asked what he was doing. He turned around slowly. He was older than I expected, maybe 60, with a wide flat face and pale eyes that caught the flashlight in a way that made me think of the deer I used to see on this land before we moved in. He looked at me without any of the normal reactions a normal person has when they've been caught doing something on someone else's property. No embarrassment and no explanation ready, no hands coming up, just looked at me. I asked him again what he was doing and told him this was private property. He looked at the tree and then back at me and said that he was almost through. I pointed my flashlight at the base of the tree. The cut was barely visible, a shallow notch in the bark, maybe an inch deep at most, a foot off the ground. On a tree that size, that cut represented hours of work, maybe more, and it was nothing. He was nowhere near through. He wasn't going to be through for a very long time. I asked him how long he'd been out there. He didn't answer that. He looked at the tree again with an expression I can only describe as patient, like a man who had been waiting a long time for something and has made his peace with waiting more. I told him he needed to leave, that this was my land and I needed him to take his axe and go home. He turned and looked at me, and something changed in his face. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something that moved behind his eyes like a thought arriving from very far away. His mouth opened slightly, then he smiled. And it was wrong. Too wide and too fast. And he started laughing. Not like an awkward laugh. Not even as this guy is unhinged. It was full and loud and came from somewhere deep and didn't stop. He laughed with his whole body. Head back, and then he turned and walked into the dark. And then laughing got quieter, and then eventually it was gone, and the tree line was empty and silent. I stood there for a moment, dumbfounded with my flashlight pointed at the space where he'd been. Then I walked back to my house, went inside and locked the door. I sat in the kitchen for a while, thought about calling someone and couldn't figure out what I would say. I thought about a lot of things I'd spent my whole life not thinking about, pushed off all of them back down there where they belong. In the morning I went out and looked at that tree in the daylight. The notch was barely an inch deep. Whatever he'd been doing out there and however long he'd been doing it, he made almost no progress at all. I've never seen him again. I've never told my wife. I still don't believe in anything I can't explain. I'm just a little slower to explain things now. I've always loved yard sales. In the summer when I have a free day, I'll often just drive around all day looking for different yard sales, wasting my day away. About 2 years ago I was doing this. Just driving around looking for yard sale signs. Gradually going further out into the rural country and enjoying the scenery. Having fun getting lost on the backcountry roads. You can sometimes find great yard sales doing this. I saw a yard sale sign off the road next to a big rock with something religious carved into it, like churches have. I can't for the life of me remember what it said. Like God's Haven or something religious, I can't remember. Anyways, I figure it's probably got some good stuff if it's a church organization, so I decide to go. I turn my new Jeep down the long, narrow gravel driveway, and the trees open up to a clearing with a really beautiful white house. They have long tables spread out with folded clothes, kids' toys, and all that, but nothing I was really interested in. There are probably 30 people milling about on the property, but they're all wearing those gray jumpsuits. Okay, I thought. The only other person that seemed to be browsing through their wares was this old man, whose truck was also parked there, but we were the only ones, save for gray jumpsuits. The woman at the makeshift table with the money box on it begins talking to me as I'm preparing to leave. I stride over to her for a friendly chat, and I notice that behind the house, there are probably 10 or so small gray buildings that gray jumpsuits are going in and out of. After some casual chat, she notices me staring. Yes, we all live here, and it's great, you know. Hey, would you like to come in and learn more? She had this crazy light in her eyes, and I attempted to mumble an excuse when she nodded at 3 guys who had been arranging stuff on the tables, moving them, etc., and they all came to stand around me. Really? Come inside. We preach peace and the word of God. You would really like it. She took my hand and kind of started tugging me towards the house. All the while these guys are following and I'm making weird protests. Then the old man who's been browsing paperbacks seems to take notice and comes up. He looks at the woman and says, "Sorry ma'am, we both really have to be going. I don't think she's interested." The woman looks shocked but lets go, and the guys step back. He's a scrawny old guy and I'm a petite woman, but that badass old man grabs my arm and hustles me over to my Jeep, and I'm thanking him and yelling back to the people to have good luck with the yard sale. He mutters in a low voice, "You really need to get out of here." My hands are shaking. All the gray jumpsuits are just turned and silently staring at us, and I'm fumbling with my keys. The old man stands by my rolled down window, and I fumble to start the car and try to back out the narrow gravel driveway. I try to do a 3-point turn, but my car slides down into the gravel in a shallow ditch next to the driveway, and I'm panicking. "Just take it easy. Put it in 4-wheel drive," he coaxes. "I don't know how to do that," I whisper frantically. I'd only had the Jeep for a couple of months at that point, and I had never had a car with 4-wheel drive before. I figured I'd learn eventually. He calmly told me how to do it and stood there guiding me as I finally got the Jeep to stop sinking into the gravel and drove the heck out of there. I yelled a thank you to him, and he nodded before getting into his truck. I told my family and a few friends, who kind of laughed and brushed it off, saying they hadn't heard of any cults in this area. Probably just a church sale at one of the members' houses. I've driven around that area a little bit after the event, but haven't seen the rock sign thing again. Though honestly, that day I drove pretty deep into rural country. I had no idea what road or where I was. I just knew the general direction to drive into, get back to a main road, and eventually find my way home. I think I may have escaped a call of some kind that is kind of off the radar. I'm a 31-year-old woman. This happened a few years back. I was walking from a friend's house to meet my son's father, ex at a bar we frequented in those days. It was winter, icy, and snowing with giant piles of snow all around. I was walking from a friend's house around 9 p.m. down an alley that served as a driveway area for many houses. Not a great neighborhood, but not particularly bad either. I was wearing my apocalypse boots, waterproof and knee-high, winterproof. I usually have headphones in blaring music while I walk, but that night, for some reason, I decided not to. In hindsight, that is probably what saved me. I'm about the equivalent of 2 to 3 blocks away from the bar. There's a younger guy, early 20s, walking about 50 feet behind me. "Hey, you." I turn around. It seems like he's talking to someone else. "Hey." I look back, then continue walking. "Yeah, you. Don't turn around, sweetheart." I start to walk faster as I realize he's getting closer. Ahead of me, I see an SUV running, backed out of a parking spot but blocking my path. I turn around. There's another guy. The door to the SUV opens, and there are a couple of guys in it looking at me. One gets out and stands by the open door. I turn to look at the guy behind me. Out of nowhere, about 5 more guys come out, surrounding me from a distance, slowly closing in. The realization that they were hiding behind piles of plowed snow hits me. I realize they are just standing and watching me. A couple of them had their phones out and were recording something that was about to go down. Nobody was smiling, but they were closing in on me, trying to get me to walk to the SUV. Fight or flight kicked in, and I decided I didn't want to know what was about to happen. I wanted to catch them off guard, so instead of running forward, I bolted to the left. Thankful for those boots. I could run across the ice no problem. I ended up cutting through a few yards and made it to the bar. My brother's fiancée, Laura, worked as a landlord for a small apartment complex in downtown Milwaukee. A nice neighborhood, however, the apartment was a bit of a dump. She and my brother were currently going through medical school, so a free vacancy was a great deal for them. She had dealt with the normal array of tenants: smelly rooms, bed bugs, noisy past hours, the usual. However, one day she had a strange occurrence with a potential tenant. A lady rang her and asked if a certain room number was for rent. Laura thought it was oddly specific, but said they did have a vacancy, just not in that room. The old lady explained that she used to live there and was hospitalized a while back. She left her apartment lease as she thought she'd be hospitalized for longer. Laura set up a time to look at other apartments in the complex and hung up. She then called her manager and discussed the old lady. Hastily, the manager said to decline the visit and to turn her elsewhere as she was asked to leave, not hospitalized, for not following the rules of the complex. Apparently, she hadn't been paying and her room stunk up the entire floor. Laura agreed, called her back later that week and canceled, citing all the rooms were booked up. Note: many of the workers that helped out the landlords were intercity college kids and not the most responsible. Laura said her job was a bit like babysitting, making sure that the cleaners and people that turned over the rooms would stay on track and get all the rooms ready for occupancy. So fast forward 2 months later, Laura is showing a few rooms off to some new tenants, when all of a sudden a rather large man walks out of his room and asks to speak to Laura when she has a chance. He was very calm and just said he was having issues with his room. Because Laura, still with the new potential tenants, didn't want to scare them away, she promptly finished the tour and took the man downstairs to talk. The man had said things in his room were out of place and even appeared missing. Things like his peanut butter and jam looked as if somebody had been eating them. She had assured him first off that it wasn't her and that no one else in that apartment complex had keys for that. He then very calmly said, "I know it wasn't you. It was an elderly woman." She then asked, "How do you know that?" It was at that moment when she realized it was the same room the woman inquired about from before, and about those bumbling college teens who flipped the rooms for the manager. They had forgotten to change the lock. The man then said that twice in the last month, he had woken up to a woman sitting in his chair, which was by his bedside, just watching him sleep all night. When asked why he didn't do anything about it, he said he was too afraid and just kept pretending to be sleeping while she was watching until she left. Once the lock was changed, they never saw her again. However, just the thought of waking up and having someone staring at you in the dark all night still sends shivers down my spine. I want to start by saying this is not something I've told many people. Not because I don't want to talk about it, but because every time I try, it comes out wrong, and people either don't believe me or they make it into something it wasn't. So I'm writing it down instead because at least that way I can get it right. This was last summer. My boyfriend Scott and I had been planning a camping trip for weeks. The kind where you actually go deep in and don't see another person the whole weekend. That was the whole point for me. I needed to completely disconnect. We drove out Friday night and hit the trailhead early Saturday morning. We found our spot a few miles in, a flat clearing beside a creek with no other tents anywhere in sight. Set up camp, made food, and sat by the fire late into the night. It was exactly what I needed. I remember thinking before I fell asleep that I couldn't remember the last time I felt that settled. We found the man the following afternoon. He was about 30 feet off the trail, sitting with his back against a wide oak, one leg stretched out in front of him. He looked up when we came through the brush, and relief on his face looked completely real. He said his name was Paul. Said that he'd come out with 2 friends. Got separated on a trail fork 2 days ago and twisted his ankle badly enough that walking was difficult. He'd been rationing his last water and hadn't eaten since the morning before. Scott crouched down and looked at his ankle. It was swollen. Paul winced when it was touched. He answered everything we asked without hesitation. Where he'd parked, which trail they'd taken, his friends' names, and where they were from. His story held together the way true stories do, with small irrelevant details and minor inconsistencies that made it feel unscripted. Scott looked at me and I looked at Scott. We couldn't leave him there. We got Paul back to camp slowly, with his arm over Scott's shoulder and me carrying an extra pack. He was grateful in a quiet, genuine way, not over the top about it. We fed him, filtered water for him, and wrapped his ankle with the bandage from our first aid kit. He sat by the fire and talked easily, dry and funny in a way that put Scott at ease almost immediately. I smiled and said the right things, but I watched him. Nothing I could point to directly, just a feeling that sat in my chest when he laughed. Something slightly off about the timing of it, like he was watching what a laugh should look like and then doing one. His questions were always about us, our jobs, our relationship, how long we'd been together, whether we camped alone often, whether our families knew we were gone. All reasonable things to ask. I couldn't have explained it to Scott why it bothered me without sounding paranoid, so I said nothing. We gave him the corner of the tent because the temperature was dropping. I lay awake for a long time that night. I woke up at some point in the night and turned over. Paul was sitting upright in the corner of the tent, knees to his chest, completely still, facing us. I could see the faint gleam of his eyes in the dark. I closed my eyes and didn't sleep again until it was light. In the morning, he was warm and easy again, helping break down camp, cracking jokes, and moving better on the ankle than the night before. We started the walk back toward the trailhead with Paul between us, and for a stretch it almost felt normal, like three friends wrapping up a trip. Scott stopped about a mile out. He was a few steps ahead of us and had paused at a bend in the trail, looking at something at eye level on a tree. I came up beside him. Zip-tied to a branch, small enough to miss it if you weren't looking, was a phone in a black case pointed directly at the trail. Not a hunting camera, not any kind of trail equipment. A smartphone angled at the exact path we'd been walking. Scott pulled it free and turned around. Paul was gone. Not limping away, not slowly backing off. Literally gone. The brush still moving where he'd pushed through it. Footsteps already fading into the trees. The twisted ankle was completely forgotten. I grabbed Scott's arm and we stood there and listened until we couldn't hear anything, and then walked the last mile out fast and without talking. We drove almost an hour before either of us said much. The phone sat in the cup holder for the whole time. No lock screen. Scott picked it up when we stopped for gas and turned it over in his hands. The notes app was open. He read quietly for a moment, then started reading out loud, then stopped. It was a log. 4 months of entries, each one starting with a date, a trailhead location, and a vehicle pulled from the parking lot. 12 entries. Each one had a couple of different physical descriptions. Gear, sleep schedules, whether they seemed capable, and whether anyone knew where they were going. Flat and methodical. Like somebody filling out a form. Some entries ended with a single asterisk. I didn't ask what that meant. Some entries just stopped mid-log with no ending written. The last entry was ours. Scott's hands were tight around the phone. I read over his shoulder. Every detail from the moment we arrived at the trailhead, in order. Our names, which we told him. Our car, which he'd gotten from the lot before we ever crossed paths with him on that trail. Notes on how I seemed more alert than Scott, and that Scott trusted faster. A line about our first aid kit that made me feel sick because it meant he'd been in our gear while we were asleep. The last line was time-stamped 2 hours before Scott found the phone. Tonight. She watches too much. Got too comfortable. Plate locked. We'll find them again when they don't expect it. I called 911. Scott pulled over and we sat with the doors locked and the engine running while I talked to the dispatcher. The detective I got transferred to told us to stay put and that somebody would reach us in 20 minutes. 17 minutes on the shoulder of an empty highway going dark. I was looking at the road ahead when Scott said my name quietly. I looked in the side mirror. A figure was standing on the shoulder about 100 yards back, right at the edge of that tree line, completely still facing the car, just standing there in the last of the light, watching us the way you watch something you've already made a decision about. Scott put the car in drive and I told him the police were coming and we were supposed to stay. He pulled out anyway and I didn't fight it. We drove until there were buildings and streetlights and other cars and people, and even then I kept checking the mirror the whole way home. The phone is with the police now and the investigation is open. We were told the parking lot at the trailhead was somewhere he used to repeatedly across different parks over a long period of time. We were told we were lucky. But lucky isn't really the word that I feel, which is alive by a margin so small that I keep coming back to it no matter how hard I try not to. I haven't been back in the woods since, and I don't think I'm going to be.